There we go. Good evening. Welcome back to 22 Panels. And I actually wrote up an intro here because my guest is too cool not to do a full intro. So the guest tonight is Spencer Ackerman, who has been a national security correspondent for outlets like The New Republic, Wired, The Guardian, and The Daily Beast for nearly the entire War on Terror. I should also point out that really Spencer or his editor wrote most of this. It came straight from his book, Reign of Terror. He's reported on the from the front lines of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Guantanamo Bay. He shared the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for public service for Edwin Snowden's NSA leaks to The Guardian, a series of stories that also yielded him other awards, including the Scripps Howard Foundation's 2014 Roy W. Howard Award for Public Service Reporting and the 2013 IRE Medal for Investigative Reporting. Ackerman's Wired series on Islamophobic counterterrorism training at the FBI won a 2012 National Magazine Award for digital media reporting. He currently writes for The Nation and his own newsletter, Forever Wars, where, along with essential coverage of the Gaza conflict, he's published some behind-the-scenes looks into his first foray into comics, Waller versus Wildstorm, with Evan Narcisse and Jesus Moreno. So, good evening, Spencer.
Hey, Tad. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining me because I mean, as I was mentioning off the air, you're one of my white whales. It's really cool to me when people outside of comics do cool things in comics. I think it helps elevate the medium, and that's one of my big passions. I also love that you're plugging Hank and Bulletproof Comics. I did crazy a couple years ago, my wife and I had different spring breaks, so I spent my spring break driving around the country to comic shops. I went, I think, Columbus to where was it in North Carolina? Wherever heroes aren't hard to find. Heroes Con down somewhere in North Carolina, up through DC and Annapolis, and then to New York. I spent a couple days in New York, hit a bunch of stores, did a loop of Scranton, Philly, some New Jersey stores, and then came home via Baltimore, or not Baltimore, Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, Cleveland, Flint. I think I hit another Indy store or Indianapolis store on my way home. So it was like 25 stores in 9 different states
Wow.
in 9 days. But Hank and Bulletproof were one of my favorite stops. And I got to ask you, has he taken you upstairs?
So it's funny you should mention that. I am one of Hank's original customers.
Oh,
I've
nice.
been shopping at that store since my mother was buying me comics.
Oh, amazing.
Um, and I have gotten to the point where now I have done signings at Hank's store, which is
Right.
amazing to me. Um, but I have only seen through CCTV feed uh, the upstairs of Bulletproof,
Oh,
which every now and then I see is stocked with just absolutely incredible things that Hank is able to find through his
well,
collecting ways.
then the next time you're in, you tell him that Tad from 22 Panels came once, and just because he knew Joe Illidge, he got to go upstairs.
Oh,
You've
cool.
seen you've seen signings. You should be able to go upstairs.
Joe's a great
Yeah,
guy, by the way.
Joe is an amazing guy. Um, I loved it that Joe was willing to take the time to go comic shopping with me when I was in New York.
Not surprising.
Not at all surprising. Um, so before we get into like all sorts of nitty gritty that I have about this, because uh, it's amazing.
Well, thank you.
It might be. I don't know if it's the best comic this year, though it's in the running, but it,
I'm
but
wow.
it,
Thank
but
you.
it, but it might be the most important.
I'm really
Uh,
touched you say that, man. Thank you.
because not only is it great, but it makes you think in ways that, particularly superhero comics, aren't commonly known to make you think. Um, so before we get into nitty gritty, just talk to me about how it came about. Who approached who? What was the initial pitch? How'd you get? I mean, I think you've mentioned that Evan was already a friend. I
Yeah,
I
that's right.
I think of Evan as the comic whisperer because, I mean, you didn't write anything else, so maybe you were able to write great comics out of the gate. But I remember Ta-Nehisi Coates' first like 6 issues of Black Panther were good, but they read like his prose, which his prose is great, but prose and comics are very different. And then he did like a 5 issue miniseries with Evan that was better than anything he'd done before. And everything leveled up from there. His Captain America run was amazing, that sort of thing. So Evan to me feels like he's the comics whisperer. He takes brilliant minds that haven't learned how to write comics and shows them how to write comics.
So, Evans, um, Black Panther Year One, Rise of the Black Panther, um, is a 6 issue masterclass
Yep.
on comics writing. And I was lucky enough that as that was coming out, he would share his scripts with me. Also, I'm a big Namor the Submariner guy. So
We
loved
were
that.
talking about Cantwell earlier. Did you read Cantwell's 5 issue
Yes,
Namor?
Conquered Shores, yes.
Okay.
Really great book. Um, um, anyway, I mentioned that because Evan put Namor in issue 2.
Yeah.
And it was really from Evan that I got like a different vocabulary for my comic book reading, let alone my comic book writing. Like I was now in looking at what Evan would put in his scripts, trying to pay attention to things like writing for the page turn. And um, I, for years, tried to get comics editors interested in me as a possible writer, and didn't succeed. And then one evening, when I probably should have had greater impulse control, I was reading the John Ostrander Suicide Squad run from the
Okay.
80s and picked up my phone and recklessly tweeted, has there ever been a year one for Amanda Waller? Because I'd like to read it. And if not, I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning national security reporter and I'd like to write it.
I love it.
And that worked. I had no
I
I
believe it. I mean,
like
that's how I got you to be on the show.
I don't,
I just tweeted at you.
it's so bless him, Chris Conroy. Uh
About to say Conroy saw it, didn't he?
yeah, Chris is the visionary editor of DC's Black Label line as well as the Milestone relaunch and the Sandman universe books.
Right.
And he reached out just to see if I was serious. And immediately I said I was extremely serious if we could talk about it. All the time thinking like, oh God, like I didn't have an Amanda Waller year one pitch in my back pocket. Like that really was like a reckless tweet. And now all of a sudden I felt myself like on the verge of this thing I'd been trying to get for
Right.
years
Right.
and thought like, well, you either have what it takes or you don't, and we're all about to find out. And I just like thought as hard as I could about what I would want to say in a book like that. When I talked to Chris, it was clear that the mandate was um do something that would help explain how she got to like you should end the series, step off the last page, and seamlessly transition into like, I mean, she appears in Legends before Ostringer Suicide Squad, but like Ostringer Suicide Squad.
Right.
So I wanted, with a year one to kind of think about like how you could get some narrative juice off the reader, ultimately knowing in broad strokes like how the book has to end.
Right.
Um, and started sort of thinking about that, going in that direction. All the while, I had been like inundating Evan with like panic texts about how like, oh man, like I think this might actually happen. Like, can you look at this? Can you look at this? Like, does this pitch look okay? Like, do you buy the treatment of the character? Do you think like, you know, the racial presentations that I'm going or, are a mistake or not? Like, help me. And, after a while, it just like in talking to Chris, like it made sense that like we should bring Evan onto the book.
Right.
Um, like I want it to be a good book. And that means understanding, like as someone who has a love and respect for the medium, that, you know, having never written one of these, it's, you know, prideful,
Right.
to expect that I wouldn't need help in writing it. Like it's just not something I'd ever done at any professional
How,
level. And yeah,
how much fiction have you done?
um, this was my first completed work of fiction. I'm not like Tanahashi is someone who for like a long, long time, like I think he said like over a decade, had his novel The Water Dancer
Right.
like in a desk drawer somewhere
Right.
and periodically would futz with it and get it to a shape that he wanted it to be at and he knew he could get it to. I'm not that. I have lots and lots and lots of like series treatment ideas that go into, greater and lesser amounts of like series bibling detail.
Right.
Um, Ideas for stories and things like that, but not something that I could, honestly say like credibly resembles a comic book script. The Waller versus Wildstorm
Well,
first issue
I
script.
was just
Yeah.
meaning that you're both having to learn comics, and there's a difference between journalism and fiction. There's a difference between
No doubt, yeah.
nonfiction writing and fiction writing in terms of the beats, in terms of the flow, in terms of so many things. Not the least of which is you didn't have to fact check.
I actually did.
You did.
Yeah, no, can I tell you about some things in
Please.
here? Yeah. So, um, without revealing this is something in issue 4 in
I mean,
particular.
everything's out. So we can do
Okay.
the John Lee's taught me this. I don't know if you know John Lee's. He's done some great comics. My favorite of his is Crimson Cage, which is Macbeth, um, like translated into like 80s regional wrestling. Um,
Oh, cool.
but when I had him on once, he's like, no, we want to be able to talk to spoilers. So anybody who hasn't
Okay.
read, here's your anybody who hasn't read Waller versus Wildstorm and is worried about spoilers, pause the recording, go read Waller versus Wildstorm, come back in 5, 4, 3, 2. Take it away, Spencer.
Okay, so this is going to be anticlimactic given all of that. But the second scene in the final issue takes place in the Hart Senate office building, room 219. The reason
Okay.
why that is because Amanda Waller and her boss, Adeline Kane, have been brought before a classified hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to answer for the events of the previous 3 issues. And as I was writing that, it suddenly occurred to me that I have been outside that room so many times. Like I can tell you what, the hallway outside, and there's a scene with the hallway outside
Right.
when we end the scene. I can tell you what that looks like. I've lined up for press scrums where you're basically jockeying with other reporters to get what the senators say as they come out of the secret room.
Right.
Um, See if they'll answer some questions, and so on. But then as I'm writing it, I'm suddenly remembering, well, first I have to make sure that in the time period this book exists in, which is like roughly speaking, the final 4 years of the Cold War. So like this is
Right.
like any time between like 1987, 1991.
Right.
And first off, I have to check,
So
and this
when
was
we
the
were 7 to 11.
yeah. So first I have to check, and this was the easy part. Was that hearing room in fact Heart 219 back then? It was. The more difficult part is I have to explain to Jesus Marino how, like, what the inside of this room looks like. And it's a classified room that I've never seen. So, like, we are, and I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm proud of this. Like, as a national security reporter, I like that we are kind of revealing a secret, like in a
Right.
low key way on a comic book page.
Right.
Like technically it's a state secret the way that room looks. Over the years, I have accumulated enough sources who've been in that room that I could call them up and be like, if you had to describe this to a sketch artist, because I have to do that, what does this room look like? Like, what's the lighting in this room look like? What's the table look like? What's on the walls? Like, what color is it? Like, that kind of stuff. So I did do like more reporting for Waller versus Wildstorm than I expected to.
See, what I love about this is that proves that you're one of us because that is the geekiest, nerdiest thing I have ever heard.
It's
So
also
many people
it's also
wouldn't
like
care,
it's
wouldn't care because
well,
nobody can fact check you.
no one can. That's the thing. Like, if I
And
mess up, no one know.
for that matter, it's Waller versus Wildstorm. So even though in your head it's that room, it doesn't have to be that room. Who says it's that room in the Wildstorm universe?
Well, like I had committed to this course of action, and by the time I was like down the road of reporting, I was not going to turn away from it. But here's the
Again,
thing, like,
Spencer, I adore
yeah,
it.
but like, if I had gotten that wrong, I would know.
But I am
If I had
certain that
just
there
said
are
we could just
people
make the room
listening to
look like
us
whatever,
who
yeah,
are like, you could have made it anything you
I could
wanted,
have
and
made it
nobody
anything I
would have
wanted.
known.
Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm not that imaginative. I
I
felt
mean,
like it should have just been the room.
my cousin worked for NASA for like a decade. She worked Missile Command, and one of the
Oh wow.
things that she talked about, even though they did tons of stuff where they talked to people at NASA and whatnot before making Armageddon, and therefore got a ton of stuff right, whatnot. The people at NASA always laughed when they were at Mission Control because they're like, Mission Control does not look that cool. We're in this dingy room with little monitors. There's no big, huge.
Right, it's not
So,
NORAD.
um, yeah, I mean, for that matter, I've heard similar things about the Situation Room in the West Wing.
Yes.
Is the Situation Room in the show The West Wing is actually like way more decked out than the actual Situation Room. Who knows if that's still true? Because God knows that presidents watch things on TV and go, "I want that."
Yeah.
But I'm digressing.
No, no, sure.
But yeah, I love that story. I love that story. I have to like reset now. That's how much I love that story, Spencer. That's like the level of geeky that, well, that I am sometimes.
Perfect. Okay.
I have to stop myself sometimes because I'll fall. I mean, this is literally why I don't have a college degree, is I would need to write a paper, and in my head, it needed to be worthy of a Pulitzer. So I'd research and research and ask more questions and ask more questions, and suddenly it'd be due in an hour.
Look,
And I wouldn't have written anything. I've just had read 4,000 pages of stuff that
I
I was still synthesizing.
it's honestly it's a discipline. Like I think you can clearly hear that's my impulse also. Like
Right.
investigative journalism definitely rewards like this degree of like obsession and hyper focus. At the same time, the discipline that you come to learn is that journalism is the art of telling what's true by 4 o'clock. Like
I like that.
the 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 budget meeting that determines what's going into the next edition when it comes in, and you have to know like for when it comes in, when to expect it, because all of this other stuff like happens once you submit that copy, so they can know like what is the art for that piece going to be, what packaging elements does it have to have. Now it's how do we search engine optimize and algorithm optimize the headline and the deck, what we call the furniture, that before the main body of the story
Right.
explains what this thing is,
Right.
um, which I came to find like prepared me decently well for the assembly line nature of comics making. Um, but like you have to get over the impulse that you have to be like every single thing I write on this subject has to be definitive.
Right.
It has to be earth-shattering. It has to be groundbreaking. And like
What?
exactly like some and your editor is going to
That's
look at your
that's what
editor.
I think about the
Yeah,
fucking paper that I was writing in high school about God knows
yeah.
what.
And like sometimes your editor is doing you a favor when they look at you and say like this is a city council meeting, it's not that deep. People need to know like five or six things that happened here. Get out of the way of telling them that. And that's valuable
It
advice in
is.
this business.
I mean, I'm now a special ed paraprofessional, and I am great at telling my students that. I've just never been good at following it
Yeah, no, no,
myself.
always the case, right?
Let's actually get into the book. Where I mean, I love the asides. This podcast is all about the asides. But let's get into the book. Give me the elevator pitch or the front counter pitch. Give me the starting off point. What do you
Waller,
call?
oh, sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah, no, go
yeah.
on.
No, no, no. You got it. So
Waller versus Wildstorm is a Cold War spy thriller set in the final days of the Cold War, in which a previously unknown operative in a mixture of the DCU and the Wildstorm universe rises to power within its principal intelligence agency through coming up with an extremely ambitious scheme that, if successful, has major geopolitical implications for the world of the United States after the Cold War. So basically, something that could play with the idea that, from the vantage point of 2023, we kind of know how this story turns out, and we're seeing Amanda Waller at the dawn of it, suggesting that she has a substantial role to play in bringing us to the world a world that will be allegorically resonant to the one that you and I and everyone listening to this lives in. And
well, hopefully everybody
that
listening to this.
that um, impulse, the plan that she launches, the ambitions she has, and its implications for what it will mean for that intelligence agency, which we are going with checkmate, um, as established in the post-crisis era by Paul Kupferberg and taken into the 21st century by Greg Rucka. Um, and one of the principal champions for a former checkmate way of doing business is the leader of Stormwatch, Jackson King Battalion, who to me is the Wildstorm universe, is the connective tissue that gets us from different eras of Wildstorm. And because it's a spy thriller, we get to see what this world looks like, what this plan looks like, what the costs of it look like, what the implications of it look like through a clash of perspectives. We see this story from Amanda's perspective. we see often the same events through Jackson's perspective. And standing outside all of them as kind of a way of me saying some things that I wanted to say about journalism, but also trying to stick with, in my first time writing for comics, like a world that I know, is Lois Lane, who, by virtue of this being an Amanda Waller year one, is an early career Lois Lane. And she comes across this story about what Amanda is doing, but doesn't necessarily trust the way that she got it. And her impulse, naturally, because it's Lois, is to investigate it further. And along the way, we are going to encounter many of your Wildstorm universe faves, as well as incorporating one of my DCU faves, who fits very well into this universe, Deathstroke the Terminator, and
Yeah.
his ex-wife Adeline Kane, who, ever since I read the Judas Contract, I have had no shortage of questions about. She's a fascinating character, and I wanted to grab her. So that was probably too heavy of an elevator pitch, but
Yeah, I
hopefully
was about to
that.
say that is like the perfect front counter pitch for a Monday afternoon at the comic shop where there's no line and you've got the nerd that really doesn't have anywhere to go at the front counter. In the elevator, I think they got off a
Yeah,
few
they got
months
off a
ago.
while ago. Yeah. So it's a superhero spy thriller in which
But I
Amanda
like it.
Waller
I like it.
triumphs over the Wildstorm universe for control over a massive geopolitical plot and the
Well,
future of
and
American power.
what you left out, and I'll admit that, and it's one of the reasons I think that this book is so important is that it's this aspect is in the book, but you don't get hit over the head by it. So you have to you're bringing people to water, but you're not forcing them to drink. What you left out of your pitch there is the underlying theme is capitalism, or at least the American version of capitalism, drives it all. Uh,
Yeah. So I've been a national security reporter for about over 20 years now. And I've reported primarily on the war on terror. And I've just seen that up close and seen it a lot of times. And I wanted to get um, some elements of Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine in this comic. There's also a reference to a really excellent book by another excellent reporter, Vincent Bevins' The Jakarta Method. And the story that that book tells about anti-communist reactionary violence sponsored usually by the United States um, is extremely useful context for understanding what American power is, particularly in a world in which it faces minimal constraints. And that's kind of the reason why I wanted to make it, in addition to the way that, it hinges nicely between um, the temporal period in which Amanda Waller's stories actually start, also Checkmate's stories start, and bridging to when the Wildstorm universe starts about 30 years ago. Um, Playing with that time period allowed me to kind of unlock a story that like brings forward um, the expanded ambitions and horizons of the now triumphal American capitalism, which is about to embark on like a real important inflection point in the development of like what we call now neoliberalism. The ability of market champions to wield state power. Um, and I felt like because of the sort of person that I am, Um, Usually when I report on this stuff and like am writing it up and thinking about it, in the back of my mind is like, and how would this work in a superhero universe? Like,
I love it.
how can I make, how can I make, um, these, how can I tell these kinds of stories in a medium and through characters who are understood to be avatars of certain conceptions of heroism and service, wherever they position themselves on like the hero villain
Right.
spectrum. One of the things I loved about Wildstorm throughout its history um, is its comfort um, with uh, paranoia about these institutions to the point where, heroism and villainy isn't often portrayed in Wildstorm comics as like the dividing line in where people, stand
Right.
arrayed against one another. It's like, which corporation do you work for?
Right.
Which intelligence agency do you work for? How do those interests array against one another? How do they align with one another? And so I wanted, to use that all like in the service of this story.
So this is my favorite kind type of conversation because I was going to go straight down my notes, but you hit into two other things that I wanted to talk about. So now I have to decide which one to go with. And I'm going to go first with you're just talking about um people being on the hero villain continuum and their place on it. And I agree with you. One of the things that makes Wildstorm cool is it spends less time with that and more time with their allegiance to this or that corporation, this or that agency, um, going all the way forward to late in the book when, well, really in the Senate hearing that you were talking about, and the guy that's asleep, the guy that's, yep, this is the outcome we want. Just keep it out of the papers. And you, I, if for no other reason than it makes it easier for me to live my life without freaking out about things. Work hard to assume the best intentions of others. And that doesn't mean that they're great people. It means that I think that in general, people are the heroes of their own story. That hero villain continuum is not something that an individual has. I don't think anybody ever views themselves as the villain. But then I see stuff like this, like some of the stuff that you actually report on. I'm like, is that really true? I mean, you've been around these people. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is do they all have internal justifications, or do they sometimes know that, yeah, yeah, this makes me a bad guy, but it's good for me.
Um, Almost always they have justifications. I part of how you can succeed in these sorts of agencies um, is by understanding yourself to being like a bastard in service of an ultimately valorous cause. I've known people who've leaned into that. I've known people who resist that and are able to tell themselves um, meaningfully stories about why other forces are worse. And so, accordingly, what they choose to do is in bounds of civilized behavior, to speak overly broadly. Um, I wanted to present a spectrum of that. There are, you know, so many, people, when I wrote the dialogue for the chairman of that committee, like, I nothing is based exclusively on one person, and I
Right.
also have to say that for legal reasons.
Yes.
But like,
Absolutely nothing is based on any one person, living or dead. I'm making that clear in case
But well,
anybody's
and
listening.
also if I and like frankly, it's hacky if I do,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so I didn't want to do that either. But I have, particularly after um the the Edward Snowden leaks about the extent of NSA mass surveillance, the extent of privacy, and I would say constitutional violations at scale. Um, Many in Congress adopted this kind of position where ultimately the scandal was that it leaked, that uh, the actual thing itself was nothing to apologize for, except perhaps it got out of control in certain elements that we can dial back. And I wanted, after we had spent, you know, 3 issues like building up to like the sense that this is a scandal if it comes out. I try and hit that note hard enough so that by the time we get to that room, there's at least some bit of surprise of like, wait, so there's no consequences for this at all? Because in the world that I report on, yeah, that's usually how it ends. There's no consequence for this at all. Someone who recently was CIA director had run a black site
Right.
where people were tortured,
Right.
and had videotapes of CIA torture in that black site, nearly 100 of them, physically destroyed, to the point where there was a Justice Department investigation into that because it looks a whole lot like what you and I would call, destruction of evidence of criminal activity.
I
But,
mean,
fast forward several years, that person ran the CIA.
right.
So very rarely would you have in real life consequences for this. So I didn't feel it would be, I felt it would be more impactful for the story and like a better dramatic reading experience if we just went right into that instead of showing that like actually Amanda was right to be worried, to be having, practically a panic attack, on the plane ride in issue 2 because
Right.
of the prospect of all of this, getting exposed and falling apart.
Um, Dialing back to Lois and that issue 1, I think that the thing that tipped me off, because Lois, is always hard to know when you're early in her career, because yeah, early Cold War, early in her career in this continuity, but Lois has been around since the 40s, so and I'm not deep into DC lore. So the what tipped me off was a line that she had very early where she said, "A banker is going to kill the people her dictator father wouldn't." And I just immediately went, "Yeah." But I had to wonder, particularly because, again, you've been on the front lines of reporting this stuff for 20 years. You know reporters as well as is that it shocked me because of who I am, but I'm acutely aware that I read more than most people. I think more than most people. Is that like, is that common for a young reporter to, I want to say, be that naive?
I asked stupid questions and got paid for it for many, many years and arguably still do.
Okay.
Um, this in my mind, this was, one of the first times Lois has been in a war zone.
Okay.
Um, one of the, she's new at the Daily Planet. We have some expository dialogue establishing that. Um, and also, I kind of need her to be the guide for a reader who's just come into
That
this
makes sense.
story.
Right.
Like, and it makes sense that Lois would be just like trying to make sure that she understands what this
What
guerrilla leader that
General
she's
Wrong is saying.
interviewing, General
Right.
Wrong, is saying to her, as Wrong is explaining why she intends to launch an insurgency against the imminent assumption of state power by Yumiko Gamora,
Right.
daughter of the infamous Wildstorm villain Kaizen
I think
Gamora,
I'm on.
and
Who will make an
also
appearance later. We'll talk about him too.
in her own right is the weaponized superhero slash sometimes supervillain Cybernary.
So I do have to also say that that's in response to one of the greatest lines I've ever seen, like single lines about America. I like the America is just the clothes that capital wears. Um, I have a feeling that much of the world looks at us that way, and our inability to see that probably is detrimental to a lot of our policy.
Yeah, so
Um,
first off, let me just quickly say before I forget, the the panel after Lois asks General Wrong the kind of, perhaps naive question, Banker is going to kill the people her dictator father wouldn't. Um, the panel after that shows how incredible an artist Jesus Marino is,
yeah,
because I needed him to do facial acting in a silent panel from a character
who's
whose
wearing a
face
mask,
is hidden.
right?
And
Oh, the eyes are fantastic here.
he just like you just see her shooting Lois a
Yeah,
look of pure like you fucking idiot.
yeah.
And I can't
Both the
believe he yeah.
both the eyes and the body language here are just, I mean, the tilt of the head, the mildly slumped shoulders. Yeah, no, that
Just like exasperated with
right,
this with this
right.
with this
I
with
mean,
this
it's
American
more
reporter. Yeah.
that panel than Lois's panel that made me think of it as a serious question that she was asking rather than just a clarification question.
Let me maybe put it like this. I had been a reporter for about 5 years, 6 years, before I went to Iraq for the first time.
Okay.
And for 3 of those years, I had been writing pretty much exclusively about the Iraq War and its fallout in the United States across like a
Which, by the
variety
way,
of different
does
ways.
make you the second 22 panels guest who's been able to say when I went to Iraq for the first time.
Tom King or someone
Yeah,
else?
Tom.
Yeah, oh, amazing. I'm gonna check that out. Anyway, I thought that I knew a thing or two about Iraq. And then I got to Iraq and I started talking to Iraqis. That first time I went, I was unembedded. And I realized how ignorant I was.
Yeah.
And I kind of tried to channel stuff like that into writing Lois, and also like the narrative necessity.
Yeah. No, no. I
This
mean,
is page
it's
two of the series.
I,
Um,
it could be. I mean, I fully acknowledge that I mean, I forget if we were already recording or not, but again, like my best friend, big brother type was investigative journalist at Southern Illinois University, blew the cover off of World Church of the Creator when he was still in
oh wow.
college. Um, was reporting on Matthew Hale. Had Paul Simon. Paul Simon wound up finishing his career as a journalism professor at
Mm.
SIU, and Mark was in his first class there. Um, so I will be the first to say that I have a certain veneration for reporters, particularly investigative reporters, that may be more than they've all earned. I hope not, because I hope that we've got a lot of really great investigative reporters out there. Um,
We do. There's just a lot of, other people
but
who are in this
but
business.
well, but that being said, I mean, and we just brought up Tom King. I assume you've read Sheriff of Babylon.
Of course, yeah.
You know, Um, what I love about Sheriff of Babylon is it really hits you over the head with the fact that they're not different from us. They're people.
So one of the
This
things that
story
I
can
yeah,
happens there, could happen here,
it's
which is
it's
not the narrative that certainly some people want out there, you know.
general wrong in this book. And this will be a theme kind of throughout Waller versus Wildstorm, is what this looks like behind the veil of American exceptionalism, in which stuff in which is a widely held kind of almost cultural understanding amongst Americans, that what they do in the world is justified because of its inherent virtue, that America is providentially in the world to lead the world and to save the world, and has the right to do this and has the right to take the measures
Right.
that it seeks to take. And then in pursuit of that. And then what this looks like when you are like General Wrong on the receiving end
Right.
of American exceptionalism. And there'll be different characters, various reactions to that according to what they feel is the correct remit of American power, purposes, and so forth. And I didn't want to write something in which the people who are like obviously right and successful agree with me, the author. I
Right.
wanted to write something where each of these characters makes good points and makes bad points,
Right.
has strong understandings that map very clearly onto reality in some cases, and then deep delusions, unconscious biases, perspectives that perhaps they can't quite shake, um, that distance them from capturing that reality.
Right.
And um,
That's a good segue.
journalists should not be spared from this, and I didn't
No,
and I
I
didn't
mean,
and I didn't
one of
spare Lois.
one of the things I remember Mark teaching me very young, and pretty certain that he won't mind. Mark Chase. I don't know if the name means anything. It might have meant something 20 years ago. He's about 5 years older than you. Um, is that all journalism is biased because we decide what to report on.
Yeah,
That in and of itself is a bias. You try to be fair.
I would also say in understanding that you write from a biased perspective, what happens next is, if you are doing this right, in my opinion, an obligation to be rigorous,
Yeah.
an obligation to the best of your ability and the utmost of your resources, figure out what that bias doesn't see, what you are missing out on, because you will miss out on stuff, and that means your readers miss out on stuff. On the other hand, it's also, I think, a more honest compact with a reader at a time in which my profession garners just extremely little public trust, often, I believe, unfortunately, quite justifiably so. And in addition to that, um,
I
in
mean, a
addition to
conversation for another day is whether or not half of the American political system managed to figure out how to hack journalism.
well,
Because
we're entering also just like a deeply disruptive period
right,
in terms of like the economic viability of
right,
journalism as we've understood it
yeah,
since like the post World War II period.
yeah,
The viability is an extreme question. Something will survive, but I don't think it's going to, with some lofty legacy exceptions, like how the New York Times over the past decade has turned itself into a juggernaut,
right.
of accumulating reporters and editors, and you know, Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post and so
Right.
forth. Like institutions like this will survive. They'll just um, not be representative of what the profession ultimately is,
Right.
with how widespread the precarity is, with how uh, diminishing, in particular, the locally focused output that we always tell ourselves in this profession is necessary to keeping a democratic culture alive. And we're replacing it with, not much. And we now have, with the sort of end of what we call social news, um, news delivered and optimized through social media. Now that we've come to kind of the end of that, over the last 18 months or so, um, no one in my business really knows what's next,
What's next?
and what those distribution um, models of the future look like. And so, because I'm a good businessman, I looked out to solve, my problems of like the viability of journalism in the future toward the stable economic model of comic books where
Right.
prosperity is assured.
Right.
So, I feel good about my choices. Um,
that I don't know if that part does, but a minute ago we had a good segue into the first meeting between Lois and Jackson King. And I really appreciated this because this is where Lois starts to shine. Jackson is definitely telling her a story, and it might be a complete story from his perspective. Uh, I think that the lines I love are him saying that he's trying to tell you, and her re responding the story you've described. You know,
yeah, the
he
difference
is
between
trying.
showing and telling when you're a
Well,
retailer. Yeah.
and I mean, really, what it is he is sticking to what and how, and she's asking why.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, a couple of things that jump out at me, particularly because at this point he's supposed to be an investigative or an inspector general, and I would hope at least that the inspector generals are tasked with figuring out why, not just what and how.
They are
Uh,
not.
they are not.
They are not.
That's
This
a
is
little
real.
sad to hear.
This is really important. Um, when you read an inspector general product, it is precisely that specificity of narrative that can often be a virtue of it, but all of the incentives when you are part of this institution, even if you are nominally independent, like an inspector general staff is, are ultimately to spare the institution. You don't have many inspector general reports, and like this is duly the function of journalism, because and not really, this is the difference between two bodies that both have an investigative mandate.
Right.
But that's kind of where the similarity, which would seem to have a big overlap in the Venn diagram, kind of breaks down. It's Lois's job
To figure out the
to,
why.
to, to figure out why this is happening, what structural conditions made this happen, and what does that mean um, for the story that the inspector general is telling. And you'll notice that there's some dialogue that I have Jackson repeat in issues 1 and 2, to Lois and to Amanda, in which he says, "What matters is what I can document. I'm here to
Right.
document something." And we
Right.
see, the wheels of his tape recorder turning. As an investigative reporter, the holy grail of what you're after are documents, because they record something significant that happened in time that
Right.
might, particularly, when kept under a veil of secrecy, might otherwise like disappear, never to appear in the public understanding. If you spend enough time reporting on documents, you come to see as well that they don't always tell you the whole story. They are crucial pieces of information, but not, and this was some of the maddening things about some of the Snowden stories, how arduous it would be to just like verify like real basic facts about a surveillance empire that's, necessarily hidden from public view, where, people who are former CIA talk all the time. People who are former FBI talk all the time. People who are former NSA until extremely recently shut up for their entire lives. Like, you would have to know where to find discussion from former NSA people, and it'd often be in fora that would be just far too technical for someone like me
Right.
to be conversing in. That's a huge digression. Um,
No,
but yeah.
I think that's on
Um,
point.
anyway,
Yeah. Um, okay. Uh,
so
the other thing,
yeah, sorry. Go on.
well, the other thing that Jackson said, and I know that this is something we see a ton in public discourse, and I'm curious as to how much of it is in private communications between reporters and their interview subjects as well. Is he finishes with "Good luck with your agenda." Um, uh, I mean, I don't want to say reporters don't have agendas, but for the most part, those agendas are to tell stories and to hopefully um, give the public the information to make more informed decisions towards making a better world. Um, which isn't really an agenda as much as just philosophy.
Well,
Um,
so I would like to agree with all of that. I appreciate it in the generosity of spirit you've offered to my profession, which hasn't always deserved it. And
and I'll agree with
I
that statement too.
um when you are across the table from someone like me who is like pushing back on a story that you are risking shit to bring to them, they might not see it that way,
Okay.
you know? And people in national security, bureaucracies see themselves, and often with great justification, as shouldering like incredibly burdensome responsibilities.
Right.
And to have someone, um, shouting at them, telling them who they really are, like Lois is, to the point where like she's, you know, past a certain level of bullshit that she can tolerate. Um, Jackson is going to be giving it as good as he's getting it. Um, we learn in issue 2. We could, he references in issue 1, but we can see in issue 2 that he
Yeah,
absolutely
I
does
guess I
not
didn't
want.
pick up as much that she lost it. And as I'm looking at it now, see, I think you've noticed a little bit. I screen capped relevant things so I could go look at the art. Looking more carefully at her face, I now realize that she's yelling at him across the table rather than just asking him the question. Uh, but
Yeah,
initially
and
when
like she's
I
got
read
to.
it more calm than that. I read it as you never found out what a civil rights agency.
This is, well, that panel is kind of where I start like escalating Lois, because like when Jackson tells her, and this is the kind of previous moment,
Right.
when Jackson tells her that like he never knew what the supply outpost is for, when we can see in flashback that he's telling Amanda Waller that this is a torture chamber and why it's a torture chamber, and how
Right.
intimately familiar he is with it as a torture chamber. Um, that's the moment where we see Lois is kind of fixated on thinking like there's something that's not right with what Jackson is saying. And her skepticism kicks in about why this guy who never talks to the press is halfway around the world, giving
Talking to the
her,
press.
spoon feeding her, like a fantastic story, like a career-making story.
Right.
And, you know, Lois as, you know, DC Comics' avatar of journalism, if not all of pop culture's avatar of journalism, kind of wouldn't be Lois if like that wasn't the impulse that she had. But because this is kind of her early in her career, I am, let's say, intimately familiar with the kinds of early career mistakes
Mhm.
that journalists can make in kind of pressure situations like that. And I wanted to channel a whole lot of that into this conversation, which goes by the end of the book like spectacularly badly.
It does. In your mind, was Jackson doing damage control? Was he trying to make this the only story so that there wasn't more digging?
Yes, and we see that when Lois is writing up her um, her story that we see form the narration at the beginning and the end
Yeah.
of issue four. That as Amanda tells him um, in the second issue, um, and this is kind of one of the emotional and like narrative climaxes of the second issue, that Jackson is overly focusing on Amanda in order to spare the rest of the organization. That tilts for like from Amanda's perspective, especially too far in the direction of justifying everything, whitewashing, ignoring everything that her boss, Adeline Kane, had already been doing, which includes human experiments,
Right.
um, and portraying Amanda like a rogue operative rather than an extremely effective operative of Checkmate doing things from her perspective that are things that Checkmate already does, except on a grander and more ambitious scale. Jackson is the company man here. He is offended by the way Lois and believes Lois to be saying that he is a mindless automaton serving a a you know unthinking war machine, and he takes naturally great exception to that, as a whole lot of people I have encountered do for reasons that I think everyone can kind of immediately understand if you were in a position like this. And I wanted to have someone in Jackson's position who would be articulating um, a theory of checkmate, an understanding of checkmate and its traditions that are noble and, from his perspective, worth fighting for and not lost yet. Amanda will have a different perspective on that. Lois has a different perspective on that. And we see Jackson really doesn't like either of their perspectives on it.
Right.
And I wanted to have that positioning be the engine of the story.
Um, Going into issue two, first, I just, early when we're meeting Yumika Gamora, and she's making it clear, no, I don't want somebody else to do this. I want it. Um, she says that in a banker's world, the soul can cry out for adventure. Was that kind of a hat tip to all of our billionaires going to space and making their own submarines and
And um, believing themselves to be like engines of history,
right,
that there is only so much that capitalism can offer the soul, um and accordingly you have to kind of look outside of it
right,
toward um and I think we can see this with certain intellectual drifts of contemporary Silicon Valley and finance people, um a kind of atavistic, pre-capitalist, romantic conception of civilization and history, in which they don't want to, have a contractor do their dirty work.
Right.
At a certain point, feeling invincible, they would want to engage in some of it themselves and enjoy the thrill
Real.
that comes with wielding power. And one of the things I love about comics and superhero comics in particular are the way you get to literalize power.
Yeah. Issue two also, I think, is where Meta has a great line because if America doesn't see itself as great, it will eat us as alive. And you already talked some about American exceptionalism. Um, but I think one of my questions for you, having spent a lot more time in a lot more of the world than I have, than most people have, um, talking to people on the ground, um, is American exceptionalism it, it unique? I mean, is there Iraqi exceptionalism? Is there Saudi exceptionalism? I mean, I know that oftentimes in the on the surface, when we're talking about history and confronting our history, Germany gets brought up, and the fact that they, in general, are willing to confront um, Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust in a way that America is not willing to discuss slavery and the Klan, etc. Um, but but again, just in your experience, I'm not expecting you to necessarily be the expert on this. Uh, how much of that is a, a human regional thing, and how much of that is uniquely American? That
So I think it's not unique at all.
Okay.
It's mundane in how you know because we're the sorts of creatures that tell each other stories, we come up with stories about our group destiny. But it is distinct. Um, there are destinies that civilizations come up with that don't have to do with conquest, that don't have to do with understanding destiny in terms of um, inflicting your civilization and its prerogatives upon the rest of the world. And, um, you know, American exceptionalism, I think, American exceptionalism um, is not something that I spend a lot. This is something of a bugaboo of mine. You can see it in my book, Reign of Terror, as well.
Yep.
I'm not super interested in discussing American exceptionalism in terms of the story that it tells itself. Um, you can read about this in, a lot of, very airy books about, American history and American culture.
Right.
I'm interested in American exceptionalism in terms of what it licenses. I'm interested
Yes.
in American exceptionalism in terms of what its works are. And through those works, the effects of American exceptionalism, I
But
think we come to understand this thing.
and that's one of the reasons I ask about it because the part of American exceptionalism that, and again, I'm certainly less traveled. Um, but like when you look at mythologies, you know, Greek and Roman gods were making mistakes all the time. Their
Mhm.
stories were about teaching you through the mistakes they made. Aesop's fables have mistakes. This is Eddie. Eddie likes to
Hi,
steal
Eddie.
the microphone mid discussion. Um, so what's always bothered me, and it makes me wonder how much it dooms us to repeat some of our most tragic mistakes, is how much we are intent on not talking about the mistakes, sanitizing the mistakes. Oh, I mean, I the reason Nate Powell was able to say that he was jealous that I was talking to you is he
That's
adapted
amazing.
he adapted or is adapting. It comes out in April. Lies My Teacher Told Me. and
Oh
he sent
wow.
me a copy, so I've been reading it. Um, and it's amazing. I totally recommend everybody pick it up when it comes out in April. Nate Powell's adaptation of Lies My Teacher Told Me. Um, but aside from just making American history so much less interesting by uh, not talking about the struggles of this or that person, not exploring how they came about their decisions, how they learned from their mistakes, whether they learned from their mistakes. Um, but by not acknowledging that those mistakes happened, it just seems to make it that much more likely that we'll do them again. And that doesn't feel exceptional at all to me.
No, there's pardon me. Yeah, there's a certain kind of farce to American exceptionalism kind of at its core, where you're just
Right.
like, this guy?
Right.
Like the like Great Britain's like big dumb son, like Great Britain's large adult son
Right.
is going to tell the rest of the world what civilization is.
Right.
And like is going to I mean, like I think we're, you know, I'm I'm of course being like flippant. Like there are
Yeah.
things about America I really love.
There are a lot of things
That
about
like
America I really love. I mean,
but
but
like this is kind of a thing about us. And operates so for material reasons. And those material reasons form certain structural realities that shape the repetition of certain behavior. And accordingly, the stories that we tell ourselves are that we are, in fact, learning from these mistakes, that we keep on, ever improving and getting better.
which is why
Um,
we take them out of our school textbooks.
Exactly. And, they don't got to burn the books, they just remove them. And,
Right.
you know, accordingly, in order to feel like we are, in order to tell a story, culturally by which we are learning from these mistakes, you have to leave out a tremendous amount of the experiences and often the basic humanity of the people uh, you know, killed, enslaved, exploited, expropriated on down the line that constitute what you are euphemistically calling these quote unquote mistakes. These mistakes are human beings that you are telling yourself um, are learning experiences for, the ever upward and ever more glorious advance of the United States of America, both domestically and geopolitically, geoeconomically.
Well, and this plays into Waller versus Wildstorm. It plays into our billionaires needing to do things rather than just pay for them. Um, how much, and this is a purely gut feeling question. I don't imagine it comes up a ton. How much do you feel that the fact that we tend to teach history in the United States in a great person and the absolutely most sanitized great person version, we talk about Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations, but we don't talk about him being a ridiculous racist and unintegrating the federal government and uh,
Or even just the idea that like we should mark the passage of history through who is in the White House,
right,
right? Like is that the history of the United States?
right.
Or is that an aspect of the history of the United States? And the implications of doing that are to increasingly view the occupant of the White House as something, royal, rather than something that is an outgrowth of, what, passes for a democratic culture in the United States.
But
Um,
I'll take it a step further, not just in terms of how we look at it, but the people doing it, whether it's the people at the CIA or the people in government or the people voting, um, tend to think on a very individual where I mean when I was re-listening to your book and uh, as you were talking about um Obama's drone strikes, I'm sitting there going, when has killing one person ever been? I mean, I guess there have been some arguments that if you managed to kill Hitler in like 1927, it might have changed the world. Um, but I just don't see how you manage to to rationally get to the idea that in the war on terror, there is such thing as a surgical strike that's going to make a difference.
Sure did a lot of them.
I know we did a lot of them.
Yeah.
We did a ton of them. But I can't even wrap my head around what the rationale is that that's going to slow them down enough to be worth the blowback, except that we don't even acknowledge the blowback.
We don't acknowledge the blowback.
I
We
mean,
don't acknowledge. Yeah.
in American, and it bothers me to think that it's not just in your average voters that have a million other things to think about, and therefore I will forgive for not having put everything together. But in the actual people planning, the idea that, oh, they're going to think and feel exactly how we want them to think and feel about this rather than how we could reasonably expect them to think and feel about this because it's how we would think and feel about this. I mean, that was my whole problem with shock and awe, even at the time. I was 21 years old, and I'm sitting there going, how is shock and awe gonna be an effective strategy? If you tried shock and awe on the United States, you would have everybody enlisting tomorrow. We wouldn't go, oh, we gotta do what those people want. It'd be like, we're going after them. But we expected Iraqis to be different.
I mean, we expected. Um, I mean, when you look at the way, you know, the United States reacted to 9/11, which was one day of airstrikes.
Before the second before the second plane had even hit, I was out to breakfast that morning. I turned to my friend and I said, I don't even know if this is an accident or an attack or whatnot, but mark my words, we're bombing Iraq. And I wish I'd been wrong.
Well, all I would just say, all I would just say about that is that American exceptionalism is a hell of a drug, and one of the ways that it impairs your faculties is it disinclines you to see other people around the world as meaningful historical actors
Yeah.
with uh, motivations that are simultaneously rational and irrational, which is to say human, materially based, historically informed. Um, Overwhelmingly, the United States throughout the war on terror, continuing to this day, and not just about the and not just in the war on terror, considers the people who live in the lands on which it conducts its direct and its proxy wars as being ignorant, as
Yeah.
being benighted people to save and educate.
Right.
And that is a consistent feature
Yeah.
of Western imperialism. Going back to
Yep.
your question about the exceptionalism of American exceptionalism, the uniqueness of American exceptionalism, it's not like, the French have their version of this, the British, the Mission Civil Estries,
Right.
the British have their version of this, the Spanish have their version of this, the Russians have their version of this, the Italians have their version of this. The Germans certainly have their version of this. Anyway, and the characters in Waller versus Wildstorm have their version of this. One of my favorite lines is in issue 3 after Deathstroke blows a hole in the Intercontinental Hotel to try and kill Battalion. And Amanda freaks out about this. He says, just tell everyone, just tell people it was a gas leak. Everyone will believe that in a shithole country like this.
That's literally
Using,
the line that I had queued up on the page
oh, good.
to lead us
Yeah.
into. We're on the
Shithole
same
country,
page.
shithole country, of course, being a Trump reference.
Oh, absolutely. That led to that works in the United States. How often is the local narrative more accurate?
I mean, whenever you are trying to read a news story about something that happens, try your best. And this is often an unrealistic thing to ask people who are not like professionally, consuming and producing news,
Right.
which is a cycle that feeds on itself.
This is I think I know where you're going, and it's one of the reasons I appreciate your newsletter because you'll link me to
Thank you. Yeah. You
them.
want to go as close, to the source of events as possible and seek out reliable, credible, which is to say with a proven track record, or with a demonstrated track record
Right.
of, validating the things that they, present as true, as you possibly can. That's not to say that those sources are without their own filters through which they see the world, the economic constraints and interests of who their employers are, um, and so on and so forth. Just that also they will likely have an expertise and a familiarity with the events being reported than, people distantly will.
Right.
In a tremendous amount. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, is it just me, or is that American journalists are more than willing to say, as reported by the Washington Post, not yet confirmed by whatever minor news agency is, as reported by the Chicago Tribune, but we have not confirmed
If
this.
they even say
Do
that, if they even say, but we haven't independently confirmed
right.
this.
But what you almost never see is as reported by this Israeli news source or this French news source or this Egyptian news source or this um is that a hole in American journalism? Do we not trust foreign journalism, or do we not have the apparatus in place to have decided what foreign journalism? I don't know entirely what question
Complex,
I'm asking here, but
yeah, complex mix of factors. One is news organizations um, tend to be embarrassed of using news that they did not originate. That is, I think, a specific hang-up of journalism in um, a for-profit enterprise searching for a point of distinction from its competitors. Um, when in reality, news is iterative, it builds on um, developments as they happen that aren't like exclusive proprietary commodities of a certain news organization, or at least more often than not, that's how it operates. And particularly when using foreign news sources, um, outlets in the United States are going to presumptively um, kind of view them as less professional. This is, a journalistic manifestation of American exceptionalism. Um, you know, Operating in the guise of probity, of rigorously checking sources, but also because of the interests of publication, often simply using those sources with a minimally credited fashion. I've been on the receiving end of this, and news organizations I've worked for have often moved my efforts at crediting such news sources further and further down in my pieces for this point of distinction point. It's not a good way. It's not an honest way to go about this profession. And I think when we see um, journalism like in Gaza right now, where I believe 91 journalists since October 7th have been killed by Israeli forces. Um, the exploitative fashion of news organizations' reliance simultaneously on foreign outlets and on foreign reporters, while treating them um, as sort of less than a full bylined American reporter, where oftentimes, when you see an American reporter's byline on a piece of foreign news, if you read all the way down to the very end, you will very often see additional reporting provided by, and then a ton of names that seem to reflect the background of the country from which the reporter was reporting from.
Gotcha.
Um, Stringers like that, as we call them in the business, really do a tremendous amount of reporting. I saw this when I worked with stringers in Iraq. When I worked with, I was not in Pakistan, but I worked with stringers who were in Pakistan to help confirm stuff. Um, Tremendous amount of work and minimal credit.
I'm going to ask you a fun question now because we've done all sorts of deep stuff, but you have the conversation between Lois and Marlowe walking through a market, and she says, "This is the greatest thing I've ever tasted. Oh my God!" So I want to know, um, what's the best food that you've discovered during an interview? I'm assuming that that came from reality.
Oh, it definitely did. Yeah. It was a so um I'm gonna do top three because I'm
Sure.
as soon
We
like
do
I've had
three. We like threes and nines. I'm a baseball guy. Threes are good.
um an Iraqi dish called masgoof, which is an unbelievably amazing grilled fish um served over like vermicelli and rice. Um that my driver's mother cooked for me, so I can't ever leave that out. That was an incredible. But
Right.
I'm a vegetarian now. I mostly eat vegan. All of this stuff is incredibly delicious and like very much not vegan. Um, um, One of the most visually striking things I've ever eaten was also, deeply delicious. An Iraqi Kurdish dish of like a beet soup, but also with like kuba, like these dumplings with like meat and rice,
Okay.
um, that are placed in this like bright red, like almost like velvet red soup that I understand also has some Iraqi Jewish origins as well,
Okay.
which is cool. Um, in Afghanistan, I was once doing an embed with a military unit that was trying to sponsor like economic development. Um, in Iraq, they were called provincial reconstruction teams or military. In Afghanistan, they didn't have that term, but I'm blanking on it right now. This was in 2010, um, and we like I was with this group of officers that went to go meet with like the guy who ran some important farm in Parwan province, which was where the enormous Bagram airfield was. Not really a center of the war in Afghanistan so much, but with a Taliban presence and with occasional violence. Um, and for this meeting, which was largely to talk about like cold storage, um, this like big, like fairly important, like farmer and regional figure, um, slaughtered a lamb like on the site. and started grilling it and served it as lamb kebabs, um, with like freshly baked like flatbread, like piping hot, on like gorgeously buttery, and slicked with the fat of this like just slaughtered and grilled lamb, um, served with like in newspaper, folded up
Hopefully
with
not your newspaper.
the only one, and the only thing accompanying it, in there, was this like terrifying looking, like surely like flaming hot pepper, like one of those like small, long, I'm
Right,
sorry, small, not so long,
right,
thin, like
right.
where like incredibly hot was. The youngest officer there, was this major, and they made him eat the pepper to determine like if anyone else was going to eat the pepper.
Right.
He turned bright red, and he was like, like clearly he thought like, I can handle this heat and could not. So I just ate. I didn't want to be a hero. And usually when you're on one of these things, what you really want to do is not draw attention to yourself. Um, so I didn't eat the pepper, but I like what easily one of the greatest things I've ever eaten.
Sounds fantastic.
Also
Sounds
with this unbelievably flavorful cantaloupe. Like it's
yeah.
crazy to think of, like like I thought I knew what a cantaloupe tasted like. And I know this is an incredibly obnoxious statement, but only when I went to Afghanistan, like did I learn like how like succulent and sweet a cantaloupe is supposed to be.
Supposed to be. Um, yeah, that's I love that. Um, we kind of talked issue 4 up front. Um, though I did really appreciate a couple of lines from Kaizen Gomorrah. Um, the one that I have to believe is an Afghanistan reference. She can conquer them, but they will never stay conquered. Um, Probably many other places too, but
Many, many, many others. And
right,
and more a statement that I wanted to hold out as kind of a general fact about the world.
right.
People don't stay conquered.
Well, particularly, I mean, no, people don't stay conquered, but I think in the modern world, we're not even really trying to conquer. We suppress and then we walk away. We don't try to change cultures. We don't try to. I mean, when you talk about early conquerors, they spread things and they learned things, and there was cultural diffusion going both ways. Now it's like, hey, we knocked you down. Be like us. Bye.
And we will be maximally extractive of
Right.
your resources.
Right.
We
Right.
expect
And
we
expect you
expect
to
you
like it.
we expect you to acquiesce to, an enduring military presence in which we will ensure that we follow no local law, or that we are bound to respect no local law or local custom except when it serves our interest. Um, it's not, you know, I don't like, holding out, you know, empires of the past as, examples of good things, but like
Oh no, I
this
you
is
get
not the Ottomans in the Balkans,
right.
for
No,
instance.
not
No, no,
trying to
no
even
offense
make
to,
them out to
yeah,
be good things, but at least there was some coherence to we're trying to make a bigger nation rather than you have something we want to take back to our place.
yeah.
You know, I mean the Alexander wasn't just, getting stuff to take back to Greece. I mean, shipping wasn't that good yet. You know. Um, but then another line from Kaizen Gamora that really I think plays into the whole series, and um is your relationship will prosper for as long as you have others to eat. Um, and to me, at least, that was a Eisenhower warned about the military industrial complex. At this point, I feel like we've gone even beyond Eisenhower's warning. When we have when we're using mercenaries, when we're using security contractors and consultants rather than soldiers, um, suddenly we're making a large, and you wrote about it some today, or I guess it was in the Nation earlier. Um, we're making a large portion of our economy dependent on being at war. What do those workers do if we don't need arms? What do those soldiers do if we don't need to hire their mercenary troop? Um, and doesn't that just beg to perpetuate a war? I mean,
Yes, and this is sort of one of the things that I wanted the book to address, that like the way as Jackson tells Amanda, your way opens the floodgates on so much of the world. And Amanda shoots back at Jackson, essentially like, open your eyes. The floodgates are open. The waters are rising. This is what it means to have won the Cold War. The the world is now a place for American capitalism to go hunting. Without I am not um I'm not making a case for Soviet communism here. What I am making a case for is that a profound and significant thing happened in global affairs when the United States became the world's unchallenged and truly global superpower,
agreed.
able to dominate events in every part of the world, which is not something really since you I, the British Empire approaches it, you
Right,
know, outside of that, not really a lot of precedent.
right. Um, and what you're writing about today was the UAW and other unions calling for a ceasefire. Um, and what went through my head with that, and I'll be honest, I think all over the place if you haven't noticed. Um, and it was the first time that I really thought about, geez, I wonder where a union would stand when it comes to the military industrial complex. And my initial thought is, oh wow, they're almost going against their interest because they've got jobs tied up in that, which makes it even more impressive to me. But it all really fits into something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is it's popular on the left, particularly among the kids who haven't like really dove into the stuff yet, to just slam capitalism and to believe that what we have in the United States is capitalism. Um, I think we've been getting farther and farther away from capitalism because all we care about are shareholders, and shareholders should only be part of capitalism. When Milton Friedman was originally writing the stuff that became Greed is Good, he was essentially making the argument that it's not the corporation's job to be moral. If there are moral needs in business, then the government should make laws. And the corporation should do whatever they need to do inside of those laws to maximize profit. That's their responsibility. Eventually, that became the government shouldn't make any laws because whatever makes the most profits is clearly the best good. But I mean, it doesn't take that much thought to know that that's not true because how much money your doctor makes versus whether or not you got better. I mean, getting better is the best healthcare outcome. how much the doctor makes
Right,
off
but
of
it's not a profitable,
it.
right?
Right.
Like it's this system runs into like lots and lots of internal contradictions,
um,
and ultimately, like,
which is
yeah.
which is why I've come to internally and in conversations really talk about the difference between shareholder and stakeholder capitalism. Shareholder capitalism is we only care about Wall Street, we only care about corporate profits, blah blah blah, and there's some real flaws with that. But stakeholder capitalism is the workers are important, the country is important, and each of them is supposed to be a check on each other. Unions are part of capitalism. Unions aren't communists, they're part of capitalism. They're what make it so that you have a perfect market between the workers and management, because workers individually are never going to have the type of information necessary to effectively negotiate with management. Government is what makes a perfect market between citizens and corporations, because there are some things where profit isn't the best goal. And the reason where all of this comes to what I'm talking about here is it's really disturbing how much we've privatized national security.
I would put it somewhat differently. On the one hand, yes, disturbing in the sense of how much very dangerous and lucrative state assets have devolved to private hands as deliberate acts um, taken by the government. But I would put it more in terms of how national security reflects private interest. How, national security is oriented outside of working class interests, oriented oftentimes um, in perhaps not in a self-conscious way, definitely not a self-understood way, arrayed against working class interests. Um, and watching in particular the rise of um, what the Harvard Business School professor emerita Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, um, demonstrates a symbiosis between um, the development of this stage of capitalism and the commodification of data, commodification of data and arbitrage of data that only makes sense at scale and only operates in such a way as to both rely on state surveillance for security of this market, for first mover advantage in the greater domination of it by American capital, and symbiosis by the state surveillance agencies of the harvested data. That was something that the Edward Snowden revelations of the NSA showed, that you know similar to how the government didn't own the telephone networks and the telephone infrastructure during an earlier age of surveillance. It relied on its partners in these corporations to conduct its operations. So too does the surveillance apparatus rely on um, you know Facebook
Well, I
and
mean,
Apple and so on.
I already had a sticky question to go there, and you just gave me another sticky question. My first sticky question, particularly based on what you're writing about Cox Media and the fact that they're actually marketing now that they can hijack your microphone essentially, which I'm pretty certain is already happening. As soon as I read that, I showed it to a coworker because literally earlier this week, she banged up her knee, and like half an hour after she banged up her knee, she opened her phone and there was an ad for a knee brace. no reason for there to be
Yeah.
an ad for
Yeah,
Negroes.
everyone has stories of this.
Um,
Everyone has observations about this. And with the advance of AI, this is going to really accelerate, and
so,
geometrically so.
so my question, and I'm gonna pair this with, I have long believed that power, communication, um, should be rights, not. I'm not actually particularly comfortable with those being in private hands rather than government hands, with the only real argument against that being the possibility of government abusing their access to data, etc. Um, but given how much data we already have banked, given how much data is already banked privately, has this ship sailed? Is it time to
So
focus on legislating how you're allowed to use that data, and setting up effective ways for, for monitoring and enforcing that versus trying to prevent it from being collected to begin
I never want to give up on restrictions on front end collection.
with?
I think this is not a principle to compromise on. Because one of the things that Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, um, does a great job of establishing is that the way that the tech and especially the online giants succeeded and became so large so quickly is because they recognized that there was um, essentially like a Wild West legal situation in terms of what the legal commodification status of data was. So basically, you did not have any idea that you needed to have a legally enforceable property right around the data that you create. And that allowed a company like Google to have it make a lot of sense that like something like Gmail is free because you are generating that data on their platform that they can say the proprietary interest is in fact ours. You participate in this service and sign away ownership, basically. Um, there are the problems with that um, aren't commercial, but they are constitutional because the records that you generate, we understand legally as in important ways meaningfully yours. These are disputed concepts and terms, and certainly, from just the perspective of economic development as it actually happened over the last 20, 30 years, um, that first mover advantage proved to be like really important. And I mean first mover advantage, not in terms of like intercompany inter-industry
Right.
competition, but relative to the law and relative to the concept of privacy protection. And that means there are still like very common sense understandings of privacy that are politically potent and able to organize around. I think, the thing that we really have to confront is the degree to which we have a real democratic small d deficit in this country, most importantly, over the economy, where so much of our actual lived behavior in terms of the impactful decisions of our lives are made, as opposed to every 2 or 4 years or however many in the voting booth.
Right.
And without that, advance of democratic control in this area, people will be, I think, naturally and to a great degree, understandably skeptical of the expansion of state power to control those economic acts. Um, um, Even as they understand somewhat intuitively that their economic destinies are drifting further and further away from their control in a frightening and destabilizing way. I've been on my soapbox for a while about this, so I think I'll just
No, no,
leave it
absolutely. And
there.
that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up because it's and I don't quite want to say we disagree on it because I don't think we disagree. I think we're it's one of the few places where we're not really in tune with each other. We're on the same side of the spectrum, but
Sure. I mean, and
so
that's
so
fine.
I wanted to be able to hear your more specific response to my question. So I like your soapbox is what I'm trying to say. Um yeah, there's just I mean so many big problems that go so many different directions. It's so hard to figure out what can be done and what can't some days. Um, but I've taken up a lot of your time, so I want to finish up with three what I hope are easy questions and at least two of them even fun questions. Um, would you consider a graphic novel adaptation of Reign of Terror?
Absolutely. I mean that sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, I
It's
honestly think we need more graphic novel adaptations of everything. As a teacher and as a reader, um, I don't think that there's a medium better suited for understanding than comics. Um, they force you to engage both sides of your brain. They work for both visual and verbal learners because you've got the words and you've got the pictures. You know, I can't make pictures in my head. My wife can't make words in her head.
yeah, okay.
you know, um,
You get this unbeatable interplay if you
right.
use, of not just word and image, but text and subtext. And you get to play with representation in a unique way.
Well, and
And yeah,
have you seen Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning was adapted by Joel Christian Gill this year.
I haven't seen that.
Fantastic.
That's interesting.
Fantastic. That's the only to me that's the your competition for most important book of the year.
Well, that's very kind
Um,
of you. Thank you.
but I saw Ibram X. Kendi. I forget if it was on PBS or MSNBC, but he was doing an interview around it, and they asked him why comics, and he's like, "This is really heavy stuff, like really heavy stuff." And in prose, there's no way to break that up with the humor without either feeling like you're treating it lightly or just whatnot. In in comics, you can introduce humor to lighten it while also adding levels of meaning. And while he didn't say specifically in the interview, I knew immediately what he was talking about, which is, the book is set up around specific figures to talk about how race relations were in various years from Cotton Mather through Angela Davis. But one of the things that Gill does is from very early in the book, when there are concepts that are still very much alive today, you'll just have a floating Angela Davis head going,
Mm,
hmm.
mm. No, that's cool.
And for that matter, in reading Nate Powell's um adaptation of Lies My Teacher Told Me, he does some similar things. Trump makes appearances in places way pre-Trump. It gives you a way to show history repeating itself without breaking the rhythm because you can handle. So I honestly think that not only would Reign of Terror make a great comic book, but it would probably work on even more levels than it already works, or it could if well adapted.
If
Um,
you had to fan cast an artist,
I mean, just because he's so good at it, Nate would be the first
All right. Okay.
Um, but I think Joel Christian Gill would do a good job. I think Ben Passmore would do a good job.
Ben Passmore, definitely. Yeah.
I think Emmy Guinness would do a good job. Um, I mean, they're probably even more than that because there are huge numbers of great artists that have never considered doing adaptation work. Um, I mean, really, I think the key to an adaptation on this is a willingness to really work with the material and with the original author.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, thank you, Ted. I hadn't considered that. That's a
but
really
but
cool idea.
I totally think it would. I mean, if I could pick two books right now to make comics out of, it'd be that and I know Jonathan Katz is a friend of yours too. His Gangsters of Capitalism. I feel like your two books made really good. I read them in very close order to each other.
Now, Katz's book especially, I think, we are overdue
Oh yeah.
for like a visual
Well, I was
telling of
thinking of it.
the advance of Smedley Butler's
Well, I
Marine
I
Corps.
was thinking of it specifically because um oh, and it's not one that I took a screen cap of. Um, there is a Smedley Butler scene in Lies My Teacher Told Me.
Oh, great.
So Nate did do a Smedley Butler page. But yeah, no, I mean I can go on and on about great nonfiction comics. It's completely. I mean, I thank Congressman John Lewis and particularly Andrew Iden for talking him into it so much because March really blew the doors open in terms of people looking to comics
For sure.
as
Yeah.
something to tell nonfiction. Um, and it is, I mean, it's such a fantastic medium for all types of storytelling. So yeah, no, stick it in the back of your head, and or as you get to know more comics people, start pitching it. Because you'd be surprised. Um, my next question, this is the one that hopefully it's fun. Um, I have a unique listenership. Hi, Mom. Hi, John. Um, and a bunch of other. Most of my listeners seem to either be comic creators or comic shop owners. Um, a whopping 20 to 30 of them per episode. So if you were hoping to really drive sales, you're going to have to boost this on your own.
Okay.
I mean, Tom King
I'm
always gets
prepared.
100 listens when he's on the show because he's Tom King and he boosts it a little bit and people listen. But I'm a small fry. Um,
I'm also well aware I'm not Tom King.
the two of you could do interesting things together, though. Did I say that out loud? That's my dream casting right there. The Spencer Ackerman Tom King book. You both work for DC. Just tossing it out there.
I don't work for DC like Tom King works
Well,
for DC.
Tom at this point is also a freelancer for DC. He's not exclusive to them anymore. So technically, you do.
I think Tom and I have like more in common as like Americans than we have as DC Comics writers. I'm not putting myself in that
You
category.
probably actually have more in common in terms of experience and knowledge of the war on terror, but that's a whole different thing. But anyway, any books or articles that you'd recommend to people who want to know more about national security, global politics, Gaza, um, but it's a
Oh, wow.
daunting thing to get into.
Um, man, big library. Let's see. If you've never encountered the Palestinian perspective on um, the establishment and maintenance of the state of Israel, read a really accessible book by the distinguished Palestinian American professor Rashid Khalidi called The 100 Years War on Palestine. Um, I am absolutely terrible when placed on the spot
That's okay.
for books.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
newsletters that you
Wait, I'm
read.
just looking at I'm looking, what on my shelf. Read Craig Whitlock's book, The Afghanistan Papers. That is um, a second draft of history of the Afghanistan War, reliant on Inspector General oral histories with many of the leading decision makers on Afghanistan throughout the 20-year war, in which what they say in private to an Inspector General interview is vastly different than the triumphal um, pronunciations um, in public throughout the war, which is to say bullshit. Um, a Read Jeremy Scahill's book Dirty Wars and Naomi Klein's book The Shock Doctrine, which together those are both like giants that my book stands on the shoulders of. Um, I would definitely I should probably stop. Like, I can really go on. So, and
Well,
at the
how
risk of leaving out so many
because
great works,
comics readers
Jane
are
Mayer's book, The Dark Side, as well.
because comics readers are notoriously bad at reading long prose. How about newsletters that you read? Where do you go for your day-to-day news?
Okay, so I read Al Jazeera's website. I don't watch a lot of TV news. Um, I'm a reader. I read, read a variety of sources, but for Al Jazeera, I read that, when I'm looking at the Israeli war in Gaza, on Gaza. I also read Haaretz, which helpfully has an English language edition. It's Israel's leading leftmost broadsheet newspaper. Um, uh, Jonathan Katz's newsletter, The
Racket.
Racket. Uh,
Not to be confused with the other racket.
that's right. Um, his newsletter is great. I read John Ganz's newsletter, which I'm blanking on momentarily. Jamel Bowie's column in the New York Times. I read and enjoy very much Liz Lenz's newsletter, Men Yell at Me. My friend Jessica Valenti's really important newsletter, Abortion Every Day, which is an ongoing chronicle of the rollback of abortion rights as they are lived and experienced. Um, my friend Van Jackson's newsletter, Undiplomatic, which is left-wing and structuralist foreign policy. Um, I could keep going on, but why don't I leave it there for now?
That's a good list. I mean, at some point I might bug you to send me a list just because I'm always reading. But on the flip side, I read enough of them already that I don't know if I have enough hours more in the day. Um,
Um, Emily Eakin, pardon me's newsletter Heated as well, which is an excellent newsletter about the climate crisis.
okay.
Daniel Denver's podcast, The Dig.
What was that? Daniel Denver.
Daniel Denver's podcast, The Dig.
Okay. My favorite question to ask, because we're comics. Um, what comic or comics do you love that you wish more people would read? So what's the one that you've read and you just don't have enough people to talk to about it?
I mean, honestly, one of them really is Evan's Rise of the Black Panther. That miniseries is incredible.
It
I
is.
really, really hope people read that.
I
Um,
second that.
um, I am an X-Men guy. I'm an X-Men guy.
Okay.
If you are not reading X-Men Red, Al Ewing's book about mutants on
Mars.
which we call Irako now, for however
See, I
long.
haven't been
The
reading it, but
Krakoa
I've
era.
heard good things.
This book is incredible.
Okay.
Uh, Teenie Howard's Catwoman, I think, doesn't get remotely
I did
the
enjoy the crossover with Batman and was thinking, and I love Teenie Howard.
um yeah, and similarly, her X-Men run of comics, I think, is legendary. From Excalibur to Knights of X to Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain. I think just an incredible body of work that's going to impact
See,
that fandom for a while.
I mean, they're
Brubaker
gonna
and
show my. She didn't she do Assassinistas? Is that the one?
Assassinistas is fantastic.
Yeah.
With
See, I'm the geeky
with
guy.
Jaime Hernandez.
No, Gilbert.
Gilbert, pardon me, pardon me,
Gilbert.
pardon me.
Yes.
With Gilbert Hernandez. That book is
Yes.
incredible. I'm blanking on who drew Euthonauts, another one of her
Oh,
books, for Black Mask.
yeah. No. Shelley's a friend.
Forgive me, that book is also
Nick
gorgeous
Robles.
and beautifully paced.
Yeah, Nick Robles.
I don't know how more people didn't um like pick up and talk about Brubaker and Phillips's Kill or Be Killed.
It's great.
I think it's one of their absolute, I mean, for such a legendary collaboration.
Yeah.
I think that was really um somewhat overlooked, if you'll forgive the pun, criminally so.
Have you read their new book?
No, I haven't. I know
Came out
there's
this
something.
week.
Yeah, I have not.
Good.
It's going to take me a little while before I get to that, I'm afraid. Um,
What? You like have a job and kids or stuff?
Unfortunately, and um, one of, I think, the absolute high points in a stellar, all-time comics great career, from one of my favorite comics writers, Greg Rucka, is
He's a
his.
fan of yours too, isn't he?
It still blows my mind. But Lazarus,
Yeah.
his collaboration with Michael Lark, is
Actually,
just a legendary
this
body
this
of.
is this is funny. The first time I thought about reaching out to you, because we do book clubs on the podcast. We've got 11 Rockets book club. We've got a heavy metal book club. We've got a comic strip book club. First time I thought about reaching out to you was when you wrote about Lazarus. I'm like, dude, it would be great to do a Lazarus book club. And then I went, no, he's way too busy. He'd never want to talk to me.
No. That's something I'll make time for.
Well, then we're
I
going to have to talk
love
about
that
that.
book.
We're
Yeah.
going to have to talk about that. Because I would love to do a deep dive over time into Lazarus. Yes.
Another book that didn't get the love that it should have. Vita Ayala's valiant book Livewire.
Okay.
I think they are one of
I love Vita
like the
Ayala.
greatest voices, the greatest newer voices in comics. And Livewire is because it's like in the kind of Harbinger
Right.
realm of Valiant, it's in the kind of mutant flavored X-Men analog
I
aspect.
think
And
I have issue one of this that I bought from Hank because Vita had signed it.
yes, Vita, thankfully, lives in Brooklyn and has signed
Right.
it at Bulletproof a couple of times. And
Right.
I have been blessed by their presence,
Yeah.
and have all 12 of those Livewire floppies signed by them.
Very nice.
Um, wow, I could really, really go on.
Well, I mean, you've absolutely established your street cred.
Can I just give one more
Oh,
because this
absolutely.
is
You can give as many as you want, man. I'm not going to make you go away, Spencer. If you want to talk until midnight, we can talk until midnight. I just figured
okay.
eventually you'd want to get rid of me.
Last one, because I really can keep doing this. A comic book that's extremely hard to find is like often like out of print, and when you have a chance to pick it up, definitely do so. But in 1991 to 1992, forgive me if I mangle the pronunciation of his name, David Michelini
Yeah.
um, did 8 issues of a Japanese flag suit hero that takes place in 4001 AD for Valiant called Rai. The 8 issues of the original Rai, one of which is drawn by Steve Ditko, are simply like some of the most like low-key incredible superhero comics ever made, especially because it starts from the perspective that this superpowered position is an inherited familial it's a familial inheritance. So this guy was born to be Rye, and when he finally gets the job, he doesn't like it. He sucks at it, and it's in the middle of a Japanese gigantic Japanese civil war. Um, this book absolutely fucking owns. And a couple years, maybe like a decade ago, when Valiant relaunched, they did a hardcover of those 8 issues.
Well, and
Um,
what I was
or
about to say
pardon
is
me,
that
not, I don't think all of those eight
no, it
issues.
is 1 through 8.
It is 1 through 8
Because
because
I am
some of the
looking at
licenses
I
expire.
I am
From,
looking at
yeah.
it right now on the website that we won't name because they don't really need our money, and if you can find it from somebody else, please do so. Though I will say that the digital price at that website that I won't name right now at least is $0. So if you want to read it for free, it is available on your most popular digital reader
This is
for free.
8 issues
Issues.
will go by so fast. You will come away from this issue.
I
You'll
mean,
come away
I
from this
haven't
series
actually
like
read this one, but I
it's
have a feeling
so
I will
good.
by the end of the week because that's how well you're selling it.
When I was like 11, 12, I loved that Valiant era. Um, it helped that Wizard Magazine pushed these books.
They did.
Um, but some of those stories are so incredible. Some of them are also exceptionally problematic. Like beyond like Valiant does a crossover called Unity, um, that is simultaneously a spectacular feat of interwoven tapestry superhero storytelling that's also a story that takes place at multiple points over 2000 years. It is woven so extraordinarily tightly, as to really like make each issue exciting in the way it sheds like perspective based light on other aspects of the series, and also is quite possibly like in the top 5 most misogynistic superhero stories of all time. And if we consider the medium we're talking about,
That is a
like
statement.
it's I still like Unity is galaxy brain stuff for me. But anyway,
Right.
just you don't have to go into any of that. You don't have to understand any of that. Just read these 8 issues of Rye,
Like I said,
and especially if apparently you
I,
can
I
do
have
that
a
for
feeling
free.
that I'll wind up doing that sooner rather than later.
It's so good. Tell me what you think of it.
I will. I will. Well, let me take us out and then we'll chat for a couple minutes before I let you go. Um, thank you so much for joining us, Spencer Ackerman. Waller versus Wildstorm is in stores now. Hardcover is due out in January.
Yeah, that's right. Toward the end of the month.
Yeah, end of January. So order it now from your local comic shop. Um, Absolutely amazing read. It will make it on my year end list. I've already slotted it in, so I had to cheat a little bit. Um, but thank you again so much, and for 22 panels, we will see you after the next page.
Hey guys, this is Tyler from 22 Panels. I'm here to tell you all about our Patreon. If you enjoy this show, please consider donating to our Patreon to keep this show going. We have many different tiers, all different levels to help you decide what's right for you. Okay, so get on out there to patreon.com/22panelspodcast.